I have a friend who used to work for an asphalt paving company, which I thought was very exotic. And he was a big admirer of the owner of the company, and he would tell stories about this man. And one of the stories was whenever the man bought a new truck for the business, he would drive it into the yard and he would call the workers out, and he would take a big iron pipe and just go wham on the back of the truck, make a dent, which of course hurt everybody. And he said, "Men, this is a working truck, a working truck. Don't worry about little dings, just get the job done in this truck." And I think that so many times we really want to keep things nice. I don't know why that's such a drive in so many of us, but we want to keep things nice. And so sometimes we make a new friend, and we go, okay, I'm not going to make the same mistakes with this friend that I made with other friends. I'm going to keep this one nice. Or you get married and you go, okay, this time it's going to be perfect. And the first fight you have, you go, oh, it's ruined. Or you build a new church building, and somebody spills grape juice on the carpet. And you go, this is why we can't have nice things. But what I think is that forgiveness is a way to acknowledge or a way to move into that part of a relationship with a new friend or a marriage or with a building where you go, all right, this one's going to be real too. This is real now. We're into the part where it has a ding. We're into the part of the marriage where there are a couple of dents, and we forgive and we move on. We're into the part of the church building process where we go, this is going to be useful building. It's going to be useful and beautiful, but useful because that's what it's for. And so we need to think, I think, instead of thinking, oh, everything's ruined if it's got a ding, you think, okay, now it's a working truck of a relationship, which is nice. A working truck gets you places and it gets the job done. It's still fun to drive. And so what if it's not perfect? The great Canadian poet Leonard Cohen said, "You can add up the parts, but you won't have the sum. You can strike up the march, there is no drum. Every heart to love will come like a refugee. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Every heart to love will come, but like a refugee." Love that image. Because I think a lot of us, we start out in the land, relationships, we're in the land of perfection, okay? Which lasts not very long. So I'm gonna keep this one just nice. I'm gonna make all the right decisions. I'm gonna use all the therapy I had with that last relationship. I'm gonna pour it all into this one. Oh man, I made another mistake, or they're not perfect, or I'm not perfect. And so you have to flee from the land of perfection once you grasp that they're not perfect and you're not perfect. And sometimes we flee from the land of perfection into the land of control. So you're like, okay, I'm just going to keep a really tight lid on everything I say. And I'm just not going to try many new things. And I'm going to keep a really close eye on that person over there. Because usually, really, it's more their fault than yours. Let's face it. And then if the land of control doesn't work, then we go sometimes to the land of despair and cynicism. And we go, nothing works, it's not worth it. And sometimes then we leave and flee from that land because it's kind of dry and inhospitable and no fun, to the land of love. And then we leave again because we forgot. But if we're wise and lucky, we'll come back to the land of love, to our spirit's home. And some people don't get there that way. Some people start in the land of need or the land of dependency, or the land of rescue. But eventually, if you're lucky and wise, you get to the land of love. But how do we live with the cracks? How do we live with the cracks in our perception of ourselves? I thought I was a smart person. I thought I was a good person. Here I go. I did that thing again. One of the ways is by the practice of forgiveness of one another and of ourselves. So you have a ribbon in your hand. Is there anybody who didn't get a ribbon on their way in? Are there ushers who could come in with the thing of ribbons and see if they have any more? Well, thank you, Gary. We have a couple people up here, down there, people with no ribbons. Everybody in there got one? Some people in the choir loft? Yeah, just do around until you find people without their hands raised. Oh. If you run out, you might have to mug one of the children for theirs. I didn't say that out loud. Don't do that. Ixnay on the ugme. And if you don't have one, you may have to do this at home. So here's what I want you to do or think about doing. Think of something that you need to forgive somebody for, or something you need to forgive yourself for, and you're going to tie a knot in the ribbon to represent that knotty thing that needs forgiveness. My advice would be don't pull it too tight, but you may if it's a really bad problem. And just hold on to it for a while. Thank you all so much for helping. How do you go about forgiving? People say, oh, I forgave him, or I forgave her, or I forgive you, but the process of it is not so clear. One of the first things you do if you're going to try to forgive is not wait for the person who wronged you to apologize, because they probably won't. At least they won't apologize correctly. Because you want them to apologize with a full sense of hearing you out about the pain that it caused you, and a full sense of understanding of what they did, and then a full, hopefully poetic request for forgiveness. But if they apologize at all, it'll probably be something like, well, I'm sorry if that hurt you. Not an apology, by the way. Forgiveness starts with a sense of inviting yourself to understand how not forgiving is going to hurt you and the people who love you. Because you're dragging around this burden, and it makes you grumpy, probably. Or it makes you feel like nobody's going to do you right, ever. Nelson Mandela famously said, not forgiving is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. It's just not how it works. And some people feel like not forgiving makes you stronger and more righteous, because you'll show them. And usually they don't really notice, because they're really not in pain about what they did. But you're in pain. And you're being poisoned. And so it's up to you to think, what's best for me, really? What's best for me and the people who love me around here? It's best to start forgiving, because then you're not being poisoned anymore. So starting to forgive means understanding and noticing how you dwell on what happened. How you have a movie of what happened in your head and it runs on a loop sometimes, if you let yourself. It's like being stung by a bee and leaving the stinger in, so the poison keeps pumping in there. You don't scratch the stinger out. You just let the wrong keep moving through your mind. You tell it to as many people as possible. You get it down so that you've really got it into a dramatically, smoothly shaped story that makes people go, oh no, while they're listening. Or you have the movie of what you did running through your head, so it wakes you up in the middle of the night and you go, I can't believe I said that. Beginning to stop dwelling on it means when the loop starts in your head, you invite yourself to think about something else. Or you play the loop, but you put silly music behind it. Or you play the loop, but you put it in black and white instead of color. Or you play the loop, but you make it really small. You make the screen of the movie you're watching it on really tiny. So it suggests to your mind that you want to lessen the impact of this thing. And all those might take a lot of will, because sometimes we don't really want to let go of what happened, and even about what we did, because it's become part of our definition of ourselves. So, the next thing you do after inviting yourself to dwell on it differently or letting go of dwelling on it is you start telling a different story about what happened. And I say this to you guys all the time. There's what happens, and then there's the story you tell about what happens. Very different things sometimes. And so the story you tell about what happened can be different when you go, she said that to me because she just doesn't love me. Or, he never loved me. Or, they think I'm stupid. Or, he despises me. I don't know why he would do that except that he despises me. He thinks I'm incompetent. Sometimes there's a story that's equally as true, because maybe you don't know what the story is really, but that is less hurtful. So replacing the hurtful story with a story that's less hurtful, while equally possibly true, is the next step. So you go, I bet they did that because they were just blinded by anger. I bet they did that because they were so caught up in the reminders of what happened to them in their childhood. Or I bet they did that because they were careless, or they weren't thinking, or they were hungry, or their blood sugar was low, or whatever the reason could be that's not so hurtful. When you start to tell a different story about what happened, does that mean you forget what happened? No, I don't think so. I'm all for vulnerability, but I think there's idiot vulnerability, and I think we shouldn't do that part. I think we should keep in mind this is a person who can do something like that. That's good information. You remember, this is a person who can do something like that. Do I want to be friends with them still or not? Do I want to stay married to them still or not? I have this information now that I didn't have before. And maybe if it's somebody you're in an intimate relationship with, you want to forget about it. But sometimes if it's a person who's peripherally in your life and is kind of toxic, you may want to just draw a boundary with them. Like you could say, I'm not speaking to you about this topic anymore. I'll talk to you about anything else, but we're not talking about this. Or you could make a container. I used to do a lot of couples counseling. And I would talk to them about containers for certain recurring arguments that just were ruts that weren't going anywhere. You probably don't ever have those. But sometimes it's good to have a container, like you set the timer for 20 minutes. You're going to talk about it for 20 minutes. When it goes ding, you're going to stop. Some people can do that. Some people can't. Or I had one couple who decided their container was going to be the bathroom. So if ever they wanted to have a conversation about this thing, they kept recurring. They were like, we have to go stand in the bathroom now. Which made it just a little bit harder and less romantic to talk about it. And it helped, but you can never tell what's going to help. So forgetting, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem has over the door, forgive but never forget. Because you can't afford to forget some things. You have to stay protected. You can't leave yourself open to damage. Again, unless you're just some kind of a saint that I don't even understand that kind of saintly life. seems unwise to me. So you forgive them, but you understand that this friend can't be trusted with a secret, or that friend will make jokes that are kind of cruel. And do I want to stay friends or not? So to forgive, you try to stop dwelling. You try to tell yourself a less hurtful story. And then you draw a boundary and you protect yourself. One of the examples of forgiveness that just rocked me was the shooting in Charleston in June. We all read about it. We were all horrified. But to see the survivors and the family members speak to that little white racist boy and do him the honor of telling him about their pain and then forgiving him, I could not accept that. I was mad at everybody. And I thought, are you really forgiving him because of your religion? You're radically practicing the Christian faith, which it does tell you to do that. Or are you part of a group that's been systematically terrorized in South Carolina for 200 years, and you know that if you do anything but forgive, if you do anything but forgive, that more violence will just rain hell down on you? Is that why you're forgiving? I don't know. I don't know if you know. And then I thought, that's kind of disrespectful. Perhaps if I were to be respectful of the folks who were standing there and forgiving that boy, I would say, I'm taking you at your word, and you are stronger than I could ever be, and I will be inspired and taught by your example. And sure enough, violence did not rain down. People were in the streets, but everybody in Charleston made a big practice of grace and love and mutual support. And then that ugly flag came down from over this Capitol building, which I thought would never happen. I lived in South Carolina for many years, and I cannot imagine a time when it would happen, but it did. Lo, it did. It was a miracle. And it really came down because Bree Newsom climbed up the pole and took it down. Just have to say, she's one of my heroes too. So, Jungian teacher Clarissa Pinkola Estes, that you heard from in the call to worship, she says this: forgiveness seems unrealistic because we think of it as a one-time act that has to be completed in a sitting. Forgiveness has many layers, many seasons. It's not all or nothing. If you can do a 95% forgiveness, you're a saint. 75% is wonderful. 60% is fine. Keep working with it. Keep playing with it. The important things are to begin and to continue. There's a healer inside who will help you if you get out of the way. For some, temperamentally, this is easy. For some, it's harder. You are not a saint if it's easy, and not a bad person if it's not easy. You are who you are, and you do it the way you do it, all in due time. I think there's so much wisdom in that she said. But what about when you can't forgive yourself? Other people have forgiven you, but you're still waking up in the middle of the night cringing at what you did. You may start to feel like you don't deserve a good life, or that you don't deserve for people to love you, so you start trying to undermine and destroy all your relationships, which is no fun for the people you're working against, by the way. Or you may feel like you don't deserve good things to happen. But one of the things that helps get you started is to realize what a pain you are if you haven't forgiven yourself for the people who love you. Because they not only have to love you the way you are, you're a person capable of doing that thing. They love you anyway. They have to not only love you, but they have to love you and reassure you all the time. Are you with me? So they have like a double duty. If you're always going, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so terrible, I'm really, then they have to go, no, you're not bad, you're not terrible, and I love you anyway. It's a lot of work. So you want to be easier on the people who are around you, and you also want to understand that if you can't treat yourself fairly and with love, then you can't do that for other people. You can only kind of fake it. And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for the planet. So the way you start forgiving yourself is the way you start forgiving other people, where you stop dwelling. You invite yourself to dwell in different ways. You tell yourself the least hurtful story you can. For example, many of you have been alive long enough to remember what happened 20 years ago. So you go, those things I did 20 years ago, gosh, I sure do understand why I did or didn't do those things. I didn't do such and such. I wasn't a great warrior for social justice 20 years ago because I had 2 toddlers and I was tired and I had a full-time job, and I'm going to forgive myself for not being the person that I imagined that I could be if I never had to sleep or take care of myself. So maybe instead of it taking 20 years for you to look back with compassion on yourself, maybe you could shorten it to like 5 or 2. You acknowledge the wrong you did. You ask forgiveness. You ask forgiveness. I don't know why. I should have to clarify this, but apparently I do, not because of y'all, but just because of the world we live in. You have to ask forgiveness of the person you wronged, not from God. Because sometimes people wrong you and they go, well, God forgives me. How nice. What did you do to God? You acknowledge the wrong you did. You ask forgiveness. You make amends if you can. Some people will let you and some people won't let you. Doesn't matter. This is for you. So you move forward, dragging as little hurt behind you as you can. Tell the least hurtful stories. Come to the wisdom that there's good and there's bad in everybody. Almost. Okay, so there are extremes. There's Gandhi and there's Hitler. But okay, anybody who mentions Hitler in an argument with me that is the losing name. So if you have to make Hitler in your argument, just give up. Because any kind of philosophical discussion should stay kind of with the middle of us. So you're talking about the most of us. All right. So they say the line between good and bad, whatever those mean, goes through the middle of every person. You're a good person, you can do a bad thing. Doesn't make you a bad person. See what I'm saying? It just makes you a human person. So this whole good person, bad person thing shouldn't really come into play as much as it does. You're a human person. You do things that are destructive sometimes. You do things that are creative sometimes. It's a little of both, being human. The best thing to do is to just start. Just ask yourself, would you forgive your best friend if they did something like this? What would you say to your best friend who did what you did? And then say that to you. The best thing to do is to begin and to continue. So if you feel ready to start to forgive the knotty thing that you put into your ribbon, you're welcome to begin to undo the knot. But if you're not ready, there's no shame in that. If you're not ready, just take it home and ask yourself, what would it take for me to be ready to begin to undo this knot? Very fruitful question, because if it's, I need for them to apologize, remember, they're not going to. Probably. So what would it take for you to be able to be ready to begin to undo that knot. Begin and continue.